Show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant. With your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Sean Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Sean.
Well, hello, everybody. We are back to another episode of the Evergreen Show with my co-host, Sean Veltman. Sean, how are you today? How's the weather? It is November. How's the weather?
It's rain and candy here, Noah. It's the day after Halloween, and I'm buried in little bite-sized treats.
Well, buried in bite-sized treats is fine, and it sets us up nicely being the day after Halloween for today's topic, because today's topic is terrifying. In fact, it's quite scary. In fact, it's something that makes me shudder inside. And so what we're going to talk about today, Sean, is this idea of succession planning for critical positions in your company. And are you ready for the time or the moment when that person may leave, and what will you do about it? The scary thing about this is we find a lot of companies aren't ready for this. And so they're making decisions from a place of fear, from a place of concern, from a place of what if, from a place of worry. Sean, I am shrieking inside with fear. So tell me what you're thinking about this.
You know, I think we often hear about succession planning and why it's important. And often it's, it comes from larger companies. And a lot of the smaller companies, that especially that I work with, the ones who are in that $30 million to $300 million space, don't put a lot of time and attention into it. Which to me is completely backwards, because one of the most underutilized or misunderstood pieces of succession planning is that when you have it in place, you can make strategic changes a lot more effectively. And what I mean by that is, we've worked with a lot of companies where they don't know what they do if a key player quit. And so they won't make any changes that they worry that key player won't like.
Right. One of the favorite examples that I think you shared with me was this Jack Welch story from his book Winning, where he talked about a key executive leaving the company and being able to not only have the replacement selected, but announce it all before the end of that day. And so the next day they were able to pick up the ball running and move on like nothing had changed. And I think this is just such a critical point, because we find so many places that aren't ready for this type of thing, whether it's a key player, a key person in the organization, or on the flip side, sometimes they're maintaining toxic people to the environment because they have nobody to replace that person. What do you think about the flip side of that?
I think that it's very common for us to hear, that's a great idea. I'd love to do that, but that would really step on Bill's toes. And if Bill got mad at us, or if Bill left, our whole operation would be in jeopardy. So we know we should be doing what you say, but we can't do it because of Bill.
Right. Yeah, Bill is always a little bit of the thorn in the side when it comes to the people that we're dealing with. There's always a Bill.
There's always a Bill.
Actually, we used to call him something else. Who was it in accounting? I forget the guy's name.
I want to say Toby.
Toby? I don't know if it was Toby. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyways, there's an interesting thought experiment that we run with some clients that I want to share here now, and then I'll give you a moment to comment on that, Sean. So one of the things that we've developed and we work through with our clients is we tell them to imagine they're a brilliant leader with a clear vision of where they want their company to go. Okay. And so as we always joke around, this should be really easy for everyone listening to this podcast, because you are, of course, a brilliant leader. But now imagine that you've been stripped of your power to fire anybody, but you can do whatever else it takes. You can cajole them. You can try and get them to see your vision. You can plead with them, but you cannot fire them. And the question we ask them is, how long do you think it would take before you have an uncooperative or toxic organization that could essentially bring your entire corporate culture down? So what's the next part of that, Sean? When we give them that and we ask them to think about that, what do you think typically happens?
Well, I think most people recognize that even without world-class strategy or, great communication skills, that's already happening. That in many of the places that we go, everybody can point out the negative influences, and there's always reasons that that these people can't be fired. So that's when we go to the second part of the thought experiment, which is...
Well, the second part is fantastic. So actually, the third part is the best part. I shouldn't show my cards there, but the second part is now we ask them to consider themselves that same brilliant leader. But this time, they can't tell them anything about their vision, their values, or how they want them to work. The only thing they can do is fire people. That's it. That's the only line of defense they have, is to fire people at their discretion, to correct their behavior by firing them. So, and then we ask the question, which of these two scenarios is best? In one, you can't fire them. In the second one, the only thing you can do is fire them. What do you think happens?
Most of the time when I've given this, overwhelmingly, people will pick the second option. And they'll say to me something like, Sean, that'd be a hard road, and it would suck to have to be, continually refilling positions. But that would be a much better way to ensure we got the people on board that we needed and set the right example about the behavior and the attitudes that we like here and that we won't tolerate.
That's right. So I think the key, which you said there, is 10 times out of 10, they always would choose the second scenario. Doesn't matter how personable or charming or persuasive they are, this is where they'd want to be. But as you mentioned and you alluded to, neither of these is really a great option. And so now I wanted to ask you, Sean, what's the real secret here? Is there a third option or a third part of the scenario that makes a lot of sense for our listeners?
The third option, of course, is to be able to combine these, to be able to communicate your vision, to be able to let people know what you expect of them, what you're working toward together, to be able to cajole them and reward them and create wonderful incentive packages, but also to be hyper vigilant about people who aren't on board and to be excising them from your team as quickly as possible. Now, what does this require, Noah? Why don't companies do it? Because this isn't a revolutionary strategy. This is simple. So what needs to be in place for this strategy to work?
Well, I mean, it goes back to what we started this discussion with. This is all about bench strength. But to me, I find a lot of the companies that I work with, they tend to really overcomplicate this. They tend to look at this. You said this is an easy thing. Everybody's heard about succession planning before. Everybody's heard about the importance of having bench strength in place. But nobody actually sits there and maps out the process. I shouldn't say nobody. The majority of companies that we talk to don't actually do this. And so I think, we're only 8 minutes into this, but it's a good time to get into the challenge here. And the challenge to me is the process of doing this. And I'm going to give you a moment here, Sean, but the challenge is this, is to simply jot down the names of every key player on your team. That's it. Every key player, put them on a piece of paper, and then draw a little line and ask yourself, do you have a valid plan in place for their departure? And their departure can mean one of many things. One, they get poached from one of your competitors. Two, we've talked about this before. They unfortunately, sadly, remorsefully get hit by a bus. Or three, they decide to move on and go somewhere else. And so the question is, do you have a plan in place for their departure? And then on the flip side of that, look at the others. Look at those who might be toxic and damaging to your company, or those who aren't really pulling your weight. And ask yourself the other tough question of, if we were to allow this person to leave, whether it was by our hand or by them leaving themselves, do we have a plan in place for their departure? And that's, to me, Sean, as simple as it gets. Now, I'm going to give you a second here to comment on that and let me know what you're thinking.
I think you're absolutely right. No, the first step is to ensure that you know who the critical players are and what you're going to do in order to fill the gap that they leave behind. The second piece to me there is what this means is that a part of your company processes in every department has to be that you're continually keeping your eye open for talent. You're continually keeping lines of communication open with people who would like to get into your company, that you're running interviews, that you've got ads out, and not necessarily that you're hiring all the time, but that you are ensuring that you're not going to be scrambling when somebody leaves and have a 6 or a 12 or an 18-week gap where a critical person's role is being unfulfilled.
So I think this is all, again, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, this doesn't have to be a very complicated process. We help clients work through this all the time. Sometimes we can do this. We can do full-blown succession planning in a day, sometimes far less. But what we've seen is the opposite. Sometimes this is like, I know a lot of my friends, for example, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I'm just going to make this connection anyways. It reminds me of a lot of my friends that are married with young children. They don't have wills. And they don't have wills because it's time consuming. It's kind of a scary thing to do. It's something they actually have to sit down and put some effort towards. But again, when you actually sit down and do it, you can do it relatively quickly, and it gives you that sense of security that you need to protect your family or protect your business and to protect your customers. And so this is the key to what we're talking about here. Building your bench strength doesn't have to be difficult. It certainly doesn't have to be challenging, and it's incredibly powerful and important for your company. Sean, anything else for our listeners today that you want to add?
I think that sums it up really nicely. I'll close with, it's better to have a succession plan and not need it than to need it and not have it.
I like that a lot. Okay, everybody. So listen, you've got the challenge. Write down all the key players in your company, all the key players, and just ask yourself, do you have a plan in place for that person's departure? Ask yourself who might be coming up from behind to fill that role. Do you need to be looking for someone from the outside? If you have a small sales team and a large selection of customers, what would happen if you lost 2 or 3 of your salespeople for whatever reason? These are the types of questions that we're always looking at with our clients, and they're the types of things that you need to be considering. Sean, any closing thoughts?
That's it. Happy day after Halloween and much later by the time you hear this. And I look forward to doing this again next week.
All right, everybody, get on those treadmills if you've had too much Halloween candy. We will see you next Monday on the Evergreen Show. As always, please feel free to leave us a review on iTunes. Send this to your friends, to your colleagues, or to anybody else. And another thing that I have to mention here is the book that Sean and I co-wrote together, Dealing with Difficult Customers, comes out this month. It may already be shipping and released by the time you hear this, but the official date is November 20th. Purchased wherever books are sold these days, which mostly means Amazon. So everybody, we will talk to you next time. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Sean Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.